The hospital at night felt like a different country, governed by its own quiet laws, where time stretched and sound learned to whisper. Fluorescent lights hummed softly above polished floors, casting long reflections that looked like pale rivers running through the corridors. Machines breathed for people who could not. Monitors blinked like tired eyes refusing to close, and somewhere far away a cart rolled slowly, its wheels murmuring against the tile. She moved through this world without drawing attention, her steps measured, her presence calm, the kind of calm that made anxious patients relax without knowing why. To everyone else, she was just the night nurse, the one assigned to the hours most people avoided, the one who worked while families slept and the city forgot about its sick. Her uniform was plain, her hair tucked neatly away, her badge unremarkable. Yet the way she observed everything betrayed a deeper awareness. She didn't just look at patients. She assessed rooms, exits, reflections in glass, the subtle change in air pressure when doors opened. Her hands adjusted 4 lines with care, but they were hands trained to act without hesitation. She spoke gently to a woman drifting in and out of consciousness, reminding her where she was, promising the pain would pass, while her eyes flicked to the hallway every few seconds, tracking movement out of instinct rather than fear. Fear had long ago been taught its place. Shortly after midnight, the rhythm of the hospital shifted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but she felt it immediately, like a tightening thread pulled somewhere deep in her chest. The automatic doors at the emergency entrance hissed open too fast, too hard, breaking the fragile peace of the night. A man stumbled inside, his breathing ragged, one hand pressed against his side where blood soaked through his jacket in dark, spreading patches. His eyes were frantic, darting from corner to corner, not the eyes of someone seeking help, but of someone running from something worse. She moved toward him instantly, guiding him to a gurney, her voice calm and professional, asking simple questions as her fingers quickly assessed the wound. It was superficial, painful, but not life-threatening. What concerned her more was the way he kept looking back at the doors, her body angled slightly, positioning herself so she could see the entrance without appearing alert. The doors slid open again, slower this time, forced, and the sound echoed down the corridor like a warning shot. The armed criminal stepped inside with a gun raised too high and a grip too tight, his mask crooked, his movements sharp with panic. The air seemed to freeze. A nurse down the hall gasped. Someone dropped a clipboard. The man shouted, his voice cracking as he demanded drugs, keys, compliance, control. Chaos threatened to erupt, but before it could, she stepped forward. Her hands were open, her shoulders relaxed, her expression soft, the image of a woman who had no intention of resisting. She spoke slowly, evenly, telling him everyone would do what he wanted, telling him no one needed to get hurt. She chose her words carefully, each one designed to lower his pulse, to anchor his attention on her voice. Inside, her mind worked at a different speed, mapping distances, noting the angle of his wrist, the way his weight shifted unevenly from foot to foot. She recognized the signs of a man on the edge, driven by desperation rather than discipline. That made him dangerous, but also predictable. He ordered them into a supply room, a cramped space filled with shelves of medical equipment and the sharp smell of disinfectant. The wounded accomplice groaned as the gurney bumped over the threshold. The criminal's gun swung wildly between faces, his breathing loud in the enclosed space. She positioned herself closest to him without appearing to challenge him, continuing to speak in that same calm tone, offering reassurances, explaining procedures, buying time. Sweat trickled down his temple. His eyes flicked repeatedly to the door, then to the wounded man, then back to her. Fear was eroding his focus. She saw the exact moment it happened, the tiny fracture in his attention, when he turned to adjust the gurney straps, lowering the gun just enough. Her body moved before thought could interfere. One step, sharp and precise. Her hand struck his wrist with controlled force, the gun clattering to the floor before the sound fully registered. She pivoted, using his forward momentum, and drove him down hard, knocking the air from his lungs. In one fluid motion she pinned him, her knee placed perfectly, her grip locking his shoulder so he couldn't roll or reach for the weapon. The room was silent except for the criminal's gasping breaths. The staff stared, frozen between shock and disbelief. She held him there effortlessly, her voice calm as she instructed him not to move, as if she were telling a patient to stay still during an injection. From a small pouch hidden beneath her uniform, she pulled out zip ties and secured his wrists with practiced speed. When security finally burst in, weapons raised, they stopped short, confused by the sight before them. A night nurse kneeling on the back of an armed criminal, completely in control. Someone asked how she managed it. She looked up, her expression neutral, and said simply that he slipped. The explanation was accepted because no one could find a better one. As they dragged him away, she stood, smoothed her uniform, and picked up the fallen gun, placing it carefully on a tray as if it were just another medical instrument. Then she washed her hands, scrubbed until the water ran clear, and returned to the corridor. The night continued. Patients still needed care, and for now, her secret remained exactly where it belonged. By the time the night began to thin and the first hint of early morning crept through the high windows, the hospital had settled back into an uneasy imitation of calm. The armed criminal was gone, the wounded accomplice taken into surgery, and security officers stood at every major entrance, trying to look prepared rather than shaken. On the surface, everything appeared normal again, but beneath that surface the building pulsed with whispers and glances that followed her wherever she went. She felt them without turning her head, felt the curiosity, the disbelief, the quiet fear. People wanted answers, labels, a story that made sense of what they had witnessed. She gave them none. She focused on her tasks, moving from room to room, checking vitals, adjusting medication, offering gentle words to patients who sensed something had happened even if they didn't know what. Her face remained composed, but inside her mind replayed the moment again and again, not with pride or excitement, but with a cold assessment of choices made and consequences narrowly avoided. She had crossed a line she had spent years carefully stepping around, and she knew lines, once crossed, never truly faded. During a brief lull near dawn, she found herself in the break room, sitting alone at a small table scarred by years of spilled coffee and carved initials. The lights were dimmer there, kinder, and the silence felt heavier than the noise outside. She wrapped her hands around a paper cup, letting the warmth seep into her fingers, and for a moment the present loosened its grip. Memories surfaced uninvited, carrying the same smells and sounds as the hospital night: metal, sweat, antiseptic, fear. She saw herself years earlier in a desert half a world away, night vision turning darkness into a strange green dream. Back then, silence had been a weapon, and trust had been earned inch by inch under fire. She remembered learning how to read people faster than words ever could, how to spot the hesitation that preceded a mistake, how to act with absolute certainty when lives depended on it. She had been good at it. Too good, some might have said. Leaving that life had been less about weakness and more about survival of a different kind. She had wanted to save instead of destroy, to mend instead of break. Nursing had offered her that balance, or so she had believed. That a knock on the doorframe pulled her back. One of the senior doctors stood there, his expression caught between admiration and concern. He didn't sit, didn't joke. He asked her, quietly, if she was all right. She answered honestly that she was. He hesitated, then mentioned that administration would likely want to speak with her, that there would be questions, reports, maybe even commendations. The word made her uncomfortable. She shrugged it off, saying she had just reacted. He studied her for a long moment, as if seeing her clearly for the first time, then nodded and left without pressing further. When she returned to the floor, the sun was fully up, pale light washing the corridors clean. Her shift ended soon after. She changed out of her scrubs, her movements slow and deliberate, as though grounding herself in the routine. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to the drama that had unfolded while it slept. She drove home through quiet streets, every mirror checked, every intersection scanned, habits that refused to die. Sleep came in fragments, broken by dreams that blurred past and present. She woke in the afternoon with a dull ache behind her eyes and a sense that something was unfinished. Her phone buzzed with missed calls she didn't recognize and messages from coworkers filled with disbelief and praise. She ignored them all. After a shower that felt more like a ritual than a necessity, she sat by the window, watching clouds drift, forcing her breathing to slow. She told herself it was over. She told herself the hospital would move on, as it always did. Yet when evening approached and she prepared for another night shift, the familiar tension returned, coiling in her chest. Experience had taught her to trust that feeling. It was the same instinct that had kept her alive before, the same one that now refused to let her relax. Back at the hospital, the atmosphere was different. Security was tighter, lights brighter, voices louder, as if noise itself could keep danger away. She moved through it all, outwardly unchanged, inwardly alert. Around midnight, as she checked a patient's chart, she noticed a man standing near the elevators who didn't belong. He wore maintenance clothes, but they were too new, too clean. He watched the cameras more than the hallways, his posture stiff, his hands hidden. She didn't stare. She passed by, committing details to memory. Height, gait, the slight bulge under his jacket. A few minutes later, the power flickered. Emergency lights snapped on, bathing everything in red. Panic stirred. Staff reached for phones and radios. She felt a grim certainty settle over her. This wasn't an accident. She moved calmly, directing a nurse to secure patients, another to stay put. Then she followed the instinct pulling her toward the stairwell. The man from the elevators emerged from the shadows, a knife flashing briefly in the red light. He lunged, fast but untrained. She deflected the strike, pain flaring as the blade grazed her arm, and closed the distance before he could recover. The fight was brief, brutal, and silent. She used the wall, the narrow space, her own momentum, until he was on the ground, disarmed and struggling for breath. She held him there, heart steady, until security arrived. This time there were no questions, only stunned looks. Later, an officer approached her privately, his voice low, respectful. He mentioned her record, her past, the words Army Ranger hanging heavy in the air. She neither confirmed nor denied it. She only asked if her patients were safe. He nodded. That was enough. As the generators hummed and order slowly returned, she went back to work, tending wounds, calming fears, doing what she had chosen to do with the skills she could never fully leave behind. Morning arrived quietly, almost apologetically, as if the hospital itself was ashamed of how close it had come to disaster twice in less than 24 hours. The red emergency lights faded back to white, generators powered down, and the building returned to its familiar rhythm of beeping monitors and distant footsteps. To most people, it was just another stressful night finally ending. To her, it felt like standing in the calm center of a storm that had not actually passed, only shifted direction. She moved through the ward, finishing her rounds, checking on patients who had slept through the chaos, offering water, adjusting blankets, answering questions with a soft smile that never quite reached her eyes. Her arm throbbed beneath the bandage hidden under her sleeve, a shallow cut that would heal quickly, but it served as a reminder that the past was no longer content to stay buried. Whispers followed her again, heavier this time. People no longer asked how she did it. Now they looked at her as if trying to reconcile two images that refused to merge, the gentle night nurse and the woman who had taken down two armed men without hesitation. She ignored the looks, focusing on the work, but inside she felt the walls closing in. Attention was dangerous. Attention brought questions, and questions led to truth she had carefully dismantled and locked away. When her shift finally ended, she didn't go home. Instead, she sat alone in her car in the parking garage, engine off, listening to the ticking of cooling metal. She stared straight ahead, hands resting on the steering wheel, and allowed herself, for the first time since the incident, to feel the weight of what had happened. Not fear, not regret, but a deep, familiar exhaustion. The kind that came from being someone you no longer wanted to be, even when the world suddenly demanded it of you again. She had left the Army Rangers believing that chapter was finished, that the instincts would dull, that the reflexes would soften with time and purpose. Nursing had been her answer, a way to use discipline and skill without violence. But nights like this stripped away comforting illusions. She realized she had never truly stopped being trained for war. She had simply changed uniforms. Her phone buzzed, breaking the stillness. This time it wasn't a coworker or an unknown number. It was a hospital administrator requesting a meeting before her next shift. She closed her eyes briefly, then replied with a simple acknowledgement. Inside the building, policies would be discussed, reports written, liability assessed. She would be asked to explain herself, to justify actions that no training manual for nurses could fully cover. The thought didn't scare her. What unsettled her was something else entirely. The realization that the threat might not be over. The second attacker hadn't been a coincidence. Someone had sent him. Someone now knew exactly who she was, or at least what she was capable of. And people who sent knives into hospitals rarely stopped at one failure. That evening, she returned to work with heightened awareness, senses tuned so sharply that even ordinary sounds felt amplified. She noticed everything. The way a security guard's hand hovered too close to his radio, the way a visitor lingered too long near the nurse's station, the subtle tension in the air that hadn't fully dissipated. She performed her duties flawlessly, but her mind was always a step ahead, anticipating movement, rehearsing responses. Near midnight, a fire alarm went off on the opposite side of the building. Protocol kicked in immediately. Staff began evacuating certain areas, patients were moved, doors sealed. She felt it instantly, that same cold certainty. This was too clean, too convenient. Alarms drew people away from where they were supposed to be. She alerted security quietly, suggesting they verify the alarm before committing full resources, but even as she spoke, she knew it wouldn't matter. Whatever was coming was already in motion, in the stairwell near the intensive care wing. She heard footsteps that didn't match the frantic rhythm of evacuation. Slow, deliberate. She positioned herself behind a corner, controlling her breathing, becoming still in a way that felt almost nostalgic. The man who appeared was different from the others. Calm, focused. His eyes scanned with professional efficiency, not panic. He carried a suppressed handgun, held low and confident. This was no desperate criminal. This was someone trained. For a split second, their eyes met, and recognition flickered, not of faces, but of skill. He understood immediately that she was not supposed to be there, that she was not unprepared. He raised the weapon. She moved first. The confrontation was violent and precise, unfolding in a blur of motion, bone, and breath. She closed the distance, deflecting the muzzle, driving him into the wall, her injured arm screaming in protest. He fought back with equal determination, each move calculated, but he underestimated one thing: her refusal to lose. She disarmed him with a sharp twist, sent the gun skidding across the floor, and used the narrow stairwell to her advantage, ending the fight with a choke that rendered him unconscious just as backup thundered as security restrained the man. She leaned against the wall, chest rising and falling, sweat cooling rapidly on her skin. An officer she recognized approached slowly, respect unmistakable in his posture. "This wasn't random," he said quietly. She nodded. She already knew. The man would talk, or someone else would make another attempt. Her quiet life was unraveling thread by thread. Later, in a small office away from the noise, hospital administration and law enforcement sat across from her. There were no accusations, only questions layered with concern and disbelief. Finally, someone asked her directly if the rumors were true, if she had once been an army ranger. The room felt very small. She considered lying, considered deflecting as she always had. Instead, she took a breath and said simply, "Yes." Silence followed, heavy and final. Nothing about her life would be simple again. Yet as she left the room and returned to her patients, she felt something unexpected beneath the fatigue and uncertainty, a sense of clarity. She had tried to run from who she was. Now she understood she didn't need to. She only needed to decide how to live with it. The days that followed blurred together in a strange mixture of routine and quiet reckoning, as if the hospital itself were holding its breath, waiting to see what she would do next. The story never reached the news in full. Pieces were smoothed over, incidents labeled as security threats neutralized, names carefully omitted. Still, the energy around her had changed. Colleagues spoke to her with a new softness, a new distance, unsure whether to thank her, fear her, or both. She continued her work without comment, administering medication, checking vitals, sitting beside patients who clung to her hand as if they sensed she was someone who understood danger in a deeper way. At night, when the corridors emptied and the world outside dimmed, she felt the familiar edge return, but this time it was different. It wasn't just instinct anymore. It was acceptance. She stopped pretending the past had nothing to offer her present. Law enforcement maintained a discreet presence, officers rotating through the hospital in plain clothes, coordinating quietly with administration. She was asked, not ordered, to consult, to advise on protocols, to identify vulnerabilities only someone with her experience would notice. She agreed, on her own terms. She refused any formal title, any public acknowledgement. This wasn't about recognition. It was about prevention. She walked the building after hours with a small team, pointing out blind spots, choke points, places where sound carried too far or not at all. Her voice was calm, precise, free of emotion. This was familiar territory, and that familiarity brought an unexpected peace. For the first time in years, she wasn't fighting herself. She was simply applying what she knew to protect rather than destroy. Point one night, long after midnight, she found herself alone in the pediatric wing, sitting beside a sleeping child whose parents had stepped out for coffee. The machines hummed softly, and the child's chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. She watched for a long moment, feeling the weight of responsibility settle gently rather than crush her. This was why she had chosen this life. Not to forget who she was, but to give those skills a different purpose. Her phone buzzed with a message from the officer she had come to trust, informing her that the men who had targeted the hospital were part of a larger operation, now dismantled. The immediate threat was gone. She set the phone aside, relief washing through her slowly. Not the sharp relief of survival, but the quieter relief of resolution. When the hospital administrator finally asked her what she planned to do, whether she intended to stay or leave, she answered without hesitation. She would stay. This place needed her, and she needed it. The night shifts resumed their familiar pattern, but something subtle had changed within her. She no longer hid the confidence in her posture or softened her awareness to appear harmless. She was still kind, still gentle, but now there was an honesty to her presence that others felt instinctively. Trouble, when it brushed too close, seemed to sense it too and move on. She trained younger nurses not just in procedures, but in awareness, how to read a room, how to trust intuition, how to remain calm when fear tried to take control. She never spoke of her past unless asked directly, and even then, she kept it brief. The lessons mattered more than the stories. On the anniversary of the night it all began, she stood outside the hospital at dawn, watching the sky lighten from deep blue to soft gold. The city stretched awake, unaware of how many times it had been protected by people whose names it would never know. She thought of the girl she had been when she first joined the Army Rangers, driven by a need to prove something, and of the woman she had become, driven by a need to preserve. Both were parts of her. Neither canceled the other. A nurse passing by greeted her with a smile, thanking her for always being there during the hardest hours. She returned the smile, genuine and warm as she walked back inside, the doors sliding open with their familiar hiss. She felt no urge to look over her shoulder. The past was no longer a shadow chasing her. It was a tool she carried with care. In the quiet of the early morning, she adjusted her badge, took a steady breath, and stepped into the corridor, ready for another shift. No one needed to know everything she had been to see exactly what she was now.